very happy to have our guest here. She left Washington, D.C. about an hour and a half ago. No, not quite. But she did speed down 95 and made it just in the nick of time. So thank you all for holding out. Welcome. My name is Ken Marcio, and I'm the Dean of the Jefferson School, and I welcome all of you this evening to our last event in this annual series. Our theme this year has been the American presidency, and we've heard from people who have spoken about the kinds of presidents we've had, the way in which we select them, the issues facing the president, and just have gotten a very good sense of that important institution in the American political system. Our guest this evening is a fitting conclusion. She's very active in politics and has been for her entire life. In fact, it all started when she was about 9 years old. She rode her bicycle door-to-door campaigning for a city council candidate who promised to build a playground in her neighborhood. At the Jefferson School, we call that transactional leadership. From that early beginning, she has forged an incredible career in politics, mostly of the Democratic persuasion, working on campaigns of many leaders in our country. So who's who? Jesse Jackson's 1984 presidential campaign, Carter Mondale in 1976 and 1980, Mondale Ferraro in 84, DeKalb in 1988, Dukakis Benson in 1988, Clinton Gore in 92 and 96, and then she made history in 2000, as we all know, when she served as the campaign manager for Al Gore, the first African-American woman to head a national presidential campaign. Her candidate received the most votes in that election, but lost. Go figure. Recently, she founded Mozilla Associates, a firm that trains grassroots advocates and citizens to be active participants in the political process. The firm provides training in strategic communications, public affairs, and issue advocacy. She is also a founder and executive director of the National Political Congress of Black Women. Described as politically savvy, provocative, and always entertaining, she is sure to have a few things to say to us tonight about the current state of the Democratic Party, our nation's politics, and the future of our country. Please welcome Donna Brazile.
Introduction. I no longer have access to Air Force 2, so I have to get here the old-fashioned way. But thank you for inviting me. It's always good to come down here to Richmond. I know a great deal about this city, of course. My relatives on my mother's side were natives of this great city. And I'm sure if I had some time and could stay here for a couple of days and stir up some gumbo and etouffee, they would all smell it and come home, and I would finally know a lot of my distant cousins. But as always, I'm running in and running out. February is one of the shortest months, and yet we're called upon to do a lot during this month. We're called upon to celebrate the achievements and reflect upon the contributions of African Americans. This is Black History Month. And we're also called upon to look back and look forward to our presidents and what they have accomplished to make our nation what it is today. So I'm going to talk tonight a little bit about the American presidency from the perspective of someone who's worked on 7 presidential campaigns. Well, that's not as bad as 56 congressional campaigns. 19 state and local. When you're a Democrat, you just work and work and work and work until you get it right. I had lunch recently with Carl Rove, and I said, Carl, you know, I think you finally turned a chap in American politics. And he looked at me and he said, what did I do? I said, well, for starters, you won this time. that you increase turnout among groups that never voted before. You helped to reinvigorate democracy. I said you made inroads in rural areas, something that Democrats sort of lost their way in doing. So I gave him all his accolades, and when I finished, he looked at me and he said, but I'm still reading your book and following what you told me to do 8 years ago. That's called growth for you. But my friends, this state has produced more presidents than any other state in the nation. And whenever I teach my class on this topic, I talk about all of the great presidents that came from the state, because of course I teach in Virginia and Maryland. We haven't been able to elect anyone from D.C. I don't think that will ever happen. Although Al Gore did come very close. Most people forgot that he was a native Washingtonian. He was born in Washington, D.C. And of course, we'll try again. But this state, all of the great presidents, all of the great heritage, all of the great background, I know that you all are not just content with having 8. As I look over the political landscape for 2008, I can't help but read every now and then Mark Warner's name. Perhaps 2008 will be his year. I'm sure Donald McKeechin, who's here, will tell me whether or not that's going to happen, because he keeps me posted on local politics and state politics. But if not, if you're Republican, I guess George Allen is thinking about it on that side. Say if you're Republican. There we go, we got 5. That's more than I've seen in the last 2 weeks, so it's okay. But hopefully, first we'll get both political parties to begin to reinvest in presidential politics in this state. I'm sick and tired of Democrats ignoring states in the South. I'm sick and tired. After all, where you get the best food anyway. I'm sick and tired of states like Virginia being in the red column before anyone casts their ballot. And I would hope over the course of this campaign season, where the parties are now equally engaged in winning, that we go back and plant new seeds and fertilize the landscape and get people excited again to get involved and participate this fall. Virginia had one of the greatest turnouts this fall, 60%. And given the lack of attention from both presidential candidates, that was pretty impressive in my judgment. So I want to congratulate you on keeping people excited, getting people out and stirring the pots here in this state, and turning people out this past fall. Now, I do know that in order to get Virginia back on the political radar screen, well, you may have to put somebody up to run for national office, and so good luck. And I'm sure when I see Mark Warner next week at the Governors Association meeting, he will be passing out his buttons as well as his business cards. Yesterday marked the 273rd birthday of George Washington, our country's first president. That George W. probably would not recognize the office of the presidency of the current George W. who occupies the White House. He would probably, in my judgment, not understand the role that polls play in modern politics, not understand the internet and being blogged or being part of the biosphere or the podcast world. He probably would not understand the complex process that now takes place to get to the White House. Washington, in his first inaugural address, assured this nation that he would hold no local prejudices or attachments and no separate views or no party animosities. Can you imagine George W., the current occupant, holding those same ideals? That sentiment seems to be out of place in the days of red states, blue states, liberal, conservative, bloggers, pundits, strategists, and polls. Partisan politics have indeed transformed the tenor as well as the tone of the modern presidential race. It's in many ways infectious, because those of us who find it to be one of the most passionate pursuits that we engage in every year of our lives. There's no such thing for those of us who are involved in presidential politics of leaving the playing field after the election. We analyze, we review, and then we get right back on the battlefield to see if we can perfect the strategies that we deployed in the last election. But I got to tell you something. You may have already seen this poll that was commissioned by Washington College. George Washington, the first George W., is now tied for 6th place in this recent poll. 7th in another poll that came out just yesterday, the Gallup poll, as being one of America's best presidents. Look like as years go on, this president is not known by young people. They have little or no information about his accomplishments or how he even got to the office of the presidency. When asked who was the greatest president, 20% chose Mr. Lincoln in this poll, followed by 15% for Ronald Reagan, who in the Gallup poll was number 1, 12% for FDR in both polls, 11% for John F. Kennedy, 10% for Bill Clinton, the last elected Democratic president, and of course 8% for the current President George Walker Bush. George Washington faced no real competition for the first presidency, and in the last 4 years we've seen a real different tone that's being set. This was the 2004 presidential election, like the 2000, was a very close election. This was a hard-fought election coming down to the final days in a handful of so-called battleground states. Who knew that once again we would find ourselves in a Florida-like election, this time not 36 days, but just a few hours as the votes were being counted in Ohio. The news coverage and television coverage were saturated for months. The American people tuned in. They were most interested in this election, and I believe that helped to produce the large turnout that we saw in 2004. Emotions ran high, producing a 61% turnout, one of the highest turnouts since 1968. And we're very pleased that we got more young people than ever before to go to the polls, and we know that that will be a challenge in future elections. 17 million more voters overall, more than 6% over the 2000 figures came out. President Bush's margin of victory was impressive, I have to say. He won. This was the first time an elected president received more than a majority vote, first time since 1988. Over 11 million more Americans voted for him in 2004 than in 2000. But the American people remain still, in my judgment, deeply divided over the future of this country. And if you look at current polls, this president is still marginally accepted by Democrats. More Democrats disagree with this president. His personal approval ratings are still well within the margin of error of being 48, 49%. And so Democrats are not ready to accept George W. Bush as their president because they have not begun to feel any affiliation to his policies or to the direction that he wished to lead us. Let me just say this in the outset before I talk a little bit about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and how we elect our president. The Democratic Party in 2004 was in its best shape ever. We registered new voters. We engaged more people. We increased the number of people who participate in grassroots politics, who built new communication networks using the internet. We had virtual community meetups in practically every community. We engaged more young people to get involved in the process. But Republicans also show that they have a strong base in American politics, mastering through a series of fundraising as well as political organizing at the grassroots level in rural areas, utilizing evangelical churches and others. They mastered the game at the local level. They had a strict and disciplined message. They had a disciplined approach to the way they organized. At the grassroots level, they use community-based individuals rather than shipping people from one state to another state. They train their supporters to go on message. As I often tell people, God spoke to Bush, Bush told Cheney, Cheney communicated with Rush Limbaugh. By afternoon, it was gospel on the Sean Hannity show. They energize a large group of dedicated volunteers and engage independent voters in all 50 states. They had a 50-state strategy, and they did not start organizing in May of 2004. Karl Rove put his strategy in place in May of 2001. So Democrats started off 3 years, millions of dollars short, millions of volunteers behind, structural gaps, information gaps on how we communicated, and yet I do believe we had the best Democratic apparatus in the history of our party. Kerry did receive, after all, 48.3% of the ballots, or 29% of all eligible voters. That's the highest percentage for a Democratic presidential candidate since 1964. 55 million voters, that's nothing to sneeze at, but clearly not enough to get us in the White House. The aftermath of this election, of course, produced whispers, and I heard them even in Washington, D.C., that the Democratic Party might become irrelevant. I assure you that this is not the case. As my father told me last year when I called home to check in to see how he voted, he said the Democratic Party ain't dead yet, just gone fishing. It's time that the party look for not only better bait, new bait, but a larger stream in which to deliver our message. And therein lies the problem for the Democratic Party and for Democratic candidates. Most Americans just don't know who we are or what we stand for. And this is something that we have to change in order to win the presidency. We cannot win by targeting 18 out of the 50 states. It's time that we run not only 50-state campaigns, but it's time that we talk to voters no matter where they live. It's time that we bring our campaigns to the people. Talk to them at work, at home, at school, at church, at the factory. But if we narrowly review the electorate and just pull out slices that we've depended on before and not build new inroads into communities, then the Democratic Party will never become a majority party again. 2 weeks ago, Democrats signaled that they would not return to business as usual. As you all know, we elected Howard Dean as the new party chairman. Now, I know many people are saying, Howard Dean. Yes, that shouting, blunt-spoken, honest, down-to-earth doctor who's not afraid to tell you. Someone asked me recently, they said, what do you think about Howard Dean? I said, he reminds me of my doctor. When I go in, expecting to get a clean bill of health, he looks at me and tells me that I have to lose weight. When I go back and tell him I've lost some weight, he looks at me and says, you're still fat. Everything that comes out of my doctor's mouth is offensive, personally. He never tells me good news. I can never impress him with my blood pressure. Cannot impress him with my temperature. There's always something more that I need to do. That's Dean's challenge, to inspire Democrats to believe again, to hold on to their convictions, to help the congressional leaders set an agenda and then stick by that agenda, to help feed the grassroots in our party, to inspire new people to get on board, to reform the Democratic Party, not to be a regular mechanic. We had a mechanic when Clinton was in office. It was easy to maintain the party when you're in control of the White House. But just try being out of power, out of sync, and out of luck, and try to be the vital opposition. Democrats need to think long and hard about how we reposition ourselves with the American people so that they know who we are and what we stand for, and that we have values, and that we have strong convictions, and we have beliefs that we're willing to take to the American people. If Howard Dean can help us do that, then Howard Dean will be a rock star for the ages. If he's unable to help us win elections and to recalibrate this party, then I think Howard Dean will fail and he will be replaced in 2 years. Democrats got to stop reinventing the wheel. The one problem I've always had working for Democrats and working on presidential campaigns is that after every campaign, we break down, we take our list, and we go home. We don't share our list. We don't keep in touch with the young people who took off for a whole year. We just break it up and go home, lick our wounds, and pray that we'll see another campaign another day. That must change. Let me tell you, sitting down with Ken Melvin, I sit down with Republicans twice a year to figure out what they're up to. Ken wanted to have lunch on Valentine's Day. I said, you can't do that, honey. So you'll mess up the rest of the day and my year if everybody saw me out, running it up with you at lunchtime. I said, can we wait until Friday? Ken, who is 37, sat there and told me to my face, he said, the Republican Party is prepared to go after black voters. I said, really? I said, how do you expect to go after black voters? You have nothing to deliver. He said, well, we're in the House. I said, that's right. And it's not a burglary this time. I said, but you have no deliverables. You have a lot of rhetoric, a lot of talk. I said, but what can you provide that Democrats haven't provided? Now, what kind of leadership will you serve up that Democrats have not served up? And for the next 2 hours, I must tell you, I was charmed by this young man who sat there and gave me chapter and verse the Republican attempt not to garner 90% of the black vote, 70% of the black vote, 50% of the black vote. They only want 20, 25, 30% of the black vote. Enough to destroy what's left of the Democratic Party. And so, I'm writing a column called The Day of Reckoning. The day when Democrats and Republicans compete for the black vote, and what that means. You see, Republicans are already recruiting young African Americans to run for public office. Young African Americans. They're already providing resources to HBCUs, historical black colleges and universities, to begin training young African Americans on how to run for public office. They've begun to set up speakers bureaus on black college campuses. In fact, Ken is going to speak at Howard University. It's the first time I've seen Republicans actually come into the community and talk to black voters. Now, I don't know if they're going to pick up a lot, but the fact that they're trying is interesting. And it should send some notice to the Democrats that they must also go back and compete for African American votes, Hispanic votes, and as I continue to line my party, white votes. Democrats cannot win with just gravy. We need some potatoes. I mean, all the black people I know in this state, all the black people Delegate Baskerville know in this state, and we still cannot win without having a healthy white base to also support our party. So we have to find ways to talk and to communicate our values and to go back and re-engage those voters to come back into our party. If the Republicans can make a play for blacks, then we should go back and make a play for whites, and a serious play at that. We cannot continue to write off white voters in the South and act as if they are now part of our long-term coalition. The Republican victory in 2004 does not mean the Democrats must become Republican-like. We have to stand for something, and sometimes we have to be in the opposition. We have to pick our battles with the Republicans. Social Security is a battle that we should pick with the Republicans. We have to offer our own alternatives. And my friends, we may not offer them in the legislative arena. We all know they're dead on arrival. If you're a moderate Republican, you're dead on arrival. So you know what would happen to moderate Democrats and liberal Democrats if we offered our alternatives. We have to offer those alternatives directly to the American people. And stop talking to people just in the Beltway about what our vision of government is all about in the 21st century. Democrats have a vision of government in the 21st century, but we haven't shared it. And if you look at the most successful candidates that we've had in the 20th century, they all had visions. They were great visionaries. Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson, Bill Clinton. We had great visionaries. We had people who knew how to use government to help ordinary people. And that is, after all, the challenge of the Democratic Party, to become relevant once again in the lives of ordinary people. So we have to go back and find ways to reconnect. But we reconnect when we have something to talk about and when we say, here's what we believe. I'll never forget when I worked for Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jackson would always tell us that suffering breeds character and character breeds faith, and in the end our faith will not disappoint us. Whenever he said that, I thought, well, we're not going to get paid this week. But what Reverend Jackson was telling us, he was trying to teach us that we had to display and show our character, that we had certain characteristics that people would like seen in a candidate. And one was, of course, the characteristic that we sometimes, or as I call the missing ingredient, is that honesty. Someone who can just talk plain. Someone who's willing to speak from the heart. Someone who's willing to tell you what time of day it is without checking their watch or going to the post to say, is it okay if I say it's midnight? Reverend said, speak your mind. Understand what you value and believe. I'll never forget when Reverend would send me into the States to campaign, including Virginia. I was one of the kids who came down here. The Reverend sent us with 100 buttons, a van filled with kids my age, 22. And we got dropped off at various churches. We didn't have any money to place campaign commercials. And so with a little Radio Shack tape recorder, we would go into a church and we would cut a commercial. Of course, you can always find somebody who can sing. We would say, come alive on May 5, punch 8 before it's too late. We came up with little slogans, put some music behind it. And you know what? We would go into the radio studio and post them into planning because it sounded like another jingle. We did it the old-fashioned way. We connected with people. We went to where people lived and they worked and they prayed. And we made it happen. And we got more delegates in this state than any other state. And he carried this state in 84 and 88. And we didn't have 1/10 of the money that Walter Mondale had. Can you imagine if I had even the kind of money that John Kerry had in 2004? So much money that he had $23 million left over. I'll never forget in 2000 how when I broke down the staff and told them that we couldn't pay anyone over $100,000, that this was a labor of love because we believed in our country and we liked our candidate, that we would go down to Nashville and we would live down in Tennessee and we will fight this battle to the bitter end. That was my rallying cry. This past year, they were offering kids $250,000. I said, what? Whatever happened to $350 a week? Am I that old-fashioned? $1,500 a month plus health insurance. I always had health insurance. I never sent the kid on the battlefield without health insurance. $1,800 a month was my going rate in 2000, and health insurance. And in 2004, they were giving people $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. We had no home on our side. None. We just had a bunch of paid operatives that would go in. And I would often go in those cities and get to the headquarters at 8 o'clock, pretending to be an intern. And I would just sit there and watch people come in at 9:30 and 10 o'clock. Over on the Republican side, they never turned the lights off. They stayed there past midnight every night. I know what they were up to, but they won, so it doesn't matter. That's the way the game is played. They had hunger. They liked their candidate. They connected with George W. Bush. No matter what you think of George Bush. And we all have different opinions about George W. Bush. I see him as a man of humor. Every time I see him on TV, I laugh. I can't believe he's president. I saw him sitting next to John Chirac the other day, and Chirac is sitting there all dignified and composed, you know, stand up and President. I'm looking for a Powerball. And I'm like, oh my God. I sent him a serious note. Congratulate him. Yeah, this is politics. I don't take it personally. Those who take it personally shouldn't be involved. Really. Sent him a note. I said, dear Mr. President, you won this time. I said, all my letters are like that. I knew I would get it. And I said, you know, as you well know, I am proud of what you did today. When he announced Condoleezza Rice and Alberto Gonzalez, I said, you're helping to change the face of American politics. Every time you put a woman, a qualified person of color up there, break the glass ceiling, break the ice, that's a bold and courageous move. So I gave him credit for that. I was trying to come up with 3 paragraphs. And so my last one was, and by the way, since you won the popular vote this time, clearly you helped to reinvigorate democracy. Sincerely yours, Donna. I got a letter in 24 hours. Handwritten. Scared me. I closed the door, turned off the light. I didn't want nobody to see it. I didn't want my staff and my interns to think that something was going on between me and the president. I didn't fax the letter over to the White House until after the staff left. I was like, why don't you go home? Go home. Carl told me I should send a letter to him because he was feeling a little hurt that no Democrats had congratulated him. He said, what's up with you Democrats? Y'all can't, take a spanking? I said, okay. I'll send you one. In my little return letter, dear Donna, thank you. Condoleezza is well qualified. I hope you support her confirmation. Thank you for your gracious comments about winning this time. But then he said, but, and all of a sudden the writing got small. I thought it was your job to reinvigorate the grassroots and get people active. Flipped it over. I hope you haven't forgotten how to do that. Oh yeah, he makes it better. Hope to see you soon, George W. Yeah, he has a sense of humor. We should keep our sense of humor. The American people, when they choose president, they not only look for honesty and trustworthiness, they look for people that they can relate to, people that they understand, who may be complex, but when he talks about, being someone who had to rely on God to get him to stop drinking, when he started talking about his personal values, people relate to that. They feel like they can come into his living room and have a conversation with him. What's wrong with that? We've lost that on the Democratic side. We spend more time writing on a piece of paper, dear, and then put the candidate. When you walk in this room, you should speak to everyone. Hello, good evening, how are you doing? How's your family? That's what we have to write. Have you ever seen the presidents? They don't write that. They say, these are your friends. And basically act accordingly. It's a whole different style and approach that the Republicans have to winning the White House. They make their campaigns a conversation with voters, almost as if they're talking to their family. The narrative is already set, the values, the person behind the title. They don't run as senator, they don't run as governor, they don't run as former vice president, they run as George. They run as Ron. We have to run with 16 titles, and everybody wants to know how many years you had that title. Democrats have to run with position papers on everything. I mean, I know more about whales and endangered species than I ever thought I would have to know, because y'all know where I'm from. In Louisiana, We don't say, that's a tiger. We look at the recipe, say, can we eat that? That was my experience going to the zoo when I was a kid. We looked and say, do we have that for dinner? Do we spaghetti in our gumbo? We have turtle gumbo, alligator gumbo. So, but once you become a Democratic operative, these are all endangered species. One Democrat, we have a Democratic governor now in Montana. Did you all know that one of the environmental groups, and I love environmental groups, I'm not picking on them tonight, because I'm an environmentalist and I'm a member of the Sierra Club. But just to show you how difficult it is for some of our candidates, there was a so-called prairie mouse, a meadow mouse, that was on an endangered species list in Montana. And they wanted Barry Schweitzer, the candidate, to take a position on that. And when I read that, I'm like, no, I'm not going to take a position on a mouse. You know, being in Washington, D.C., we kill anything. It looks like a mouse, act like a rat, maybe a raccoon, kill it. Well, they wanted a position paper. And so many of our presidential candidates start off with 16, 17, 18 position papers, and what happens? The opposition takes us apart. We now have to explain not only that we're pro-choice, if we for late term, midterm, first term, rare term, partial, impartial. I say, when can I go back to just being a good Catholic? And go to church without thinking, I'm going to say, bless me, Father, I've sinned. What about you? I don't want to talk about abortion and gay rights and the position of the Democratic Party today. When did we ever become Hollywood? Most voters who rejected our candidates last year saw them as being a caricature of Michael Moore. They saw Hollywood celebrities campaigning with John Kerry and said, I don't want John Kerry because that guy didn't move and he was buck naked. And we lost voters that way. And so, my friends, when you think about the American presidency and how Democrats come back and how the Democratic Party can be retooled, you got to understand that we have to really re-engage people and we have to put forward candidates who are not afraid to tell their story and share their values and their convictions and why they believe in certain things with people without feeling afraid of feeling that if they start talking about why they believe in certain federal programs, that voters will not be tuned off and tuned out and turned off. The other day when I sat down with Howard Dean, he was talking about Social Security, and he was passionate. And he was very passionate. I have no problems with a man who shouts and shows his emotions. I'm Catholic. I said sometimes he sounds like a Baptist. When Dean finished, I went into a tirade. He woke up something in me. It wasn't even the bagel. I said, Governor, did you read that the White House has plans to eliminate the Head Start program, the program that has given millions of kids a head start in life, an even start in life, childhood immunization, childhood nutrition. So I was one of the, in 1965, I was one of the first kids to get a head start in life. I can't believe they want to cut this program. I said, we have to talk about why this is a very important and successful program. And for those who talk about moral values, I mean, poverty is mentioned in the Bible 3,000 times. I know, I've had to read it several times. The Catholic version, the Standard version, the Baptist version, the Presbyterian version, every version, you name it. And Governor Dean looked at me and he said, you're right. I said, but we can't go out there and just talk about it as a value, as a program. We're not talking about it as a value. Do we value our children? Do we value every child in this country? Do we value making sure that they go to bed with food? Do we value immunizing all our children? How can we fight Al-Qaeda and keep this nation strong and prosperous if we're not willing to invest in our children and our future? Can we talk about that? You see, you're right. I got involved in politics because I was poor. And I figured, you know what? This is the only thing I can do that I can help my entire community. Not just me. Not just my family. And the politician that was running promised our parents a playground. We said, that's great. And they said, and we also will pave the roads, because back then we just had shells on the street. And I said, I didn't care about that, we didn't have a car. The roads were fine. But I went to my friends, Baby Jack and Randy, and I said, your mom and dad registered? I went to Pam, your mom and dad registered? Jack, Miss Eunice, Mr. Charles, they registered. And by the end of the summer, we had 300 families registered. And by the next year, our first election in a small town in Kenner, Louisiana, we won that election. And he kept his promise. He not only produced a playground, but I became a coach by the age of 12. That's also one of the reasons why I care about my Social Security. By 14, I was paying into the system. Based on my calculation, even if I ever die early, I want all my money. I don't want to transfer it. I don't want to invest it in. I go to Las Vegas all the time. I'll put a nickel in a slot machine. Why would I give them $2 trillion? Well, my friends, if we don't transform American politics, I think we transform it by really re-engaging people to get involved politically and to begin to take more of an interest in our campaigns. The biggest part of American politics is still the non-voting party. It is still the party that has the largest membership. More Americans sit home than participate, and we have to change that. Although turnout was great, we have to rescue a generation from their apathetic ways, and that's why I think it's important that we have civic engagement, that we teach civic education in our classrooms the way it was taught when I was growing up, that we give students a reason why they should get more involved, and to develop those traits early in life. I tell my students, I say, if you're interested in running for public office, please don't drink your way through college, sleep your way through college, scratch your back one day and say, well, how come I didn't really, think about this until I was 45? I say, no, Republicans think about it at 9. The Heritage Foundation will pick them up at 10. And by age 15, the college Republicans have already decided what campus that they will go on. And by age 30, they're now running, not only the Republican Party, but the political director of the White House, 30. The communication director of the White House, 30. Dan Bartlett, 31. I don't even want to tell you on the Democratic side, because I have nothing against people who are in their 50s, because I'm heading in that direction quickly. What I'm saying is that they already have 2-3 generations in the pipeline, and we're still trying to get the current generation. There was a poll the other day in North Carolina. The average age of a black politician in North Carolina is approaching 70. 70. And they talk about the drought of leadership of young African Americans under age 50. And they're saying, Dan Bloom, one of the most respected lawmakers I know in that state, he said that we got to do a better job of nurturing. And I'm like, huh? Yeah. We got to stop eating our young. For too long, liberals have eaten their young. We've not cared. After we've marched and changed this country in the 60s, and many of us went on to do other things with our lives, all of a sudden we got another generation come up and like, shh, you don't do that, can't do that. We're telling our young people that they can't do things, that they can't change this country, and yet we know they can change this country. We know they can make a difference if we get them engaged and we get them involved in politics now. Give them a seat at the table, and as I tell my kids, if they won't give you a seat, bring in a folding chair and take over. Just take over. Mrs. King was tired of fighting for a bill to make her husband's birthday a national holiday. When I came along with other young people, we're like, we're 20. What do we have to do? Oh, we'll get a job. But before we get a job, can we at least work on this? Then Ronald Reagan was elected. They said, it'll never happen. You have a conservative president. We're like, this is the time. When America votes one way, their souls normally go another way. Call that guilt. Call it whatever you want to call it. But we knew we could build a groundswell. We knew we could build a movement. We did. We built a movement. Within 2 years, we had 7 million signatures. We went to Washington, D.C. with our signatures. And with a conservative president, with a Democratic Congress, you know what? We got that bill through. And I live to see the day that King's birthday became a national holiday. We didn't take no for an answer. We didn't allow the so-called conservative movement to stop us from organizing. We went out there and we did what normal people would do. We just talked about the issue. We talked about the man. We talked about his dream. We talked about his unfinished agenda. And we said, why not make this a day when we can talk about all of this? And we can celebrate his vision of a beloved community. We can talk about his goals for this country to ensure that this was the best nation on the planet. And people agreed with us, and they were ready for a holiday. And so what I'm saying is that right now, when George Bush is in office, and when the Republican Party is the most strongest that has ever been in 50 years, this is a time to go back out and refertilize the landscape, plant new seeds, and to galvanize people to change this country for the better. This is no time to grow weary. This is a time to go back out there and to find quality candidates. Even if you've got to go in the state houses and local government and pull them up and say, we need you now to run statewide. We need you to run for federal offices. We need you because our country is calling on you to help change the current course and help change the tide. That's what Republicans did in the 1980s. That's what Newt Gingrich did in the 1990s. That's how he was able to get a contract out there as a platform to talk to the American people and, yes, to take back the government from Democrats. I told Nancy Pelosi recently, I said, you're such a nice person. I said, I would designate 7 people in the Congress, and please make sure that they look the part. Not that ugly people should not apply. I have nothing against ugly people. I think ugly people are just as effective as pretty people. But sometimes, when they demonize you, you have to be weary of the setup, and you don't want to go out there and look like you got horns, and you don't wash your face, but you go out there and you look like every regular person in the world. And I say, you got 7 Democrats who are in safe seats, and we need them to go out every day on the House floor. I don't care what they're discussing, and just talk about the arrogance of the majority. The fact that they're not sharing legislation. The fact that they're not opening up hearings to witnesses who oppose their views. The fact that they're not willing, before a bill is brought before a committee, to even share it with the ranking member. Can you at least have somebody go out there every day and just beat on them and beat on them and beat on them? And next time they fire or they replace one of their committee chairmen, as they replace Chris Smith, and Republicans, hear me out on this one, when they replace someone, just because he was willing to work with Democrats on the Veteran Affairs Committee, no offense, that's one area where we should be bipartisan, because when it comes to our troops, I want to give them what they need. I want to make sure that they have health care. I want to make sure that their families are taken care of, because when they're on the battlefield, we should be their family, the American people, and we should help them. And so I said to Ms. Pelosi, I said, you get 7 people out there every day, smile, bright red suits if they're female, bright red tie if they're male, go out there and look the part, and speak the language the way people understand it. Don't give us 15-cent words when a nickel word would do. And just tell us. Make it plain. Tell us what's going on. Tell us the truth. Tell us why we're unable to solve our problems. Tell us why with a $2.6 trillion budget that we have to cut out programs for poor kids, yet we have enough money to explore what's on Mars. Is anyone here interested if there was water on Mars? I'm interested in making sure the water I'm drinking right now in the Potomac is clean. Is anyone interested in the vast red desert? I'm making sure that there's nothing in our desert that might come to harm us. I mean, it's a question of values. So have somebody go out there every day. Character matters. We gotta make sure that Democratic candidates understand that. And that they're not just willing to give you a piece of paper with their long and lengthy resume on how many courses they taught at Harvard and how many classes they went to at Yale and how many speeches and how many pieces of legislation. People like that, thank you. But what about your family? Can you tell us about your family? Can you tell us what you did before you entered politics? People want to know a little bit about you, the person. What motivates you. They want to see something behind the title that they can relate to. They want to connect. Most voters who didn't vote for John Kerry, number one reason, of course, national security. They didn't feel that They didn't trust that John Kerry would keep them safe and secure. I'll never forget in 2002, 39%, there was a 39% gap between Democrats and Republicans on national security. And get this, the Republicans kept talking about national security. Democrats said, can we change the subject? And we lost the Senate. So you can't change the fact that after September 11th, the American people want a president, they want elected office holders who can keep them safe and secure. You can't change that. And you gotta accept it, and you gotta come up with a reason, you gotta come up with something that you can tell the American people that you believe in on national security, perhaps homeland security, homeland defense, first responders. Talk about that, and people will feel that you'll keep them safe and secure. Once they feel that you'll keep them safe and secure, they'll listen to your plan to reduce the deficit. They'll hear you out on your plans to stop outsourcing. They'll want to support your plan to provide health care, but if they don't feel safe and secure, they're like, yeah, job is good, but if you're dead, it doesn't really matter. Because that's how you feel. And that's why we lost women in 2004. Because many of those women were security moms. They were not soccer moms. And they were fiercely loyal to supporting someone who made them feel safe and secure. This was a family issue for them. And yet, many on my side ignored them. The American presidency is an important institution. It embodies our dreams and our aspirations as a free people. And the American people look up to the president to reflect our values, almost as if we look in the mirror and we see in the president who we are as a country. And so this is a very important institution. And the men and women that we should put in the pipeline, notice I said women, if the poll out today, and I'm not one that go around taking polls and testing polls, but God knows when you see one as good as the one I saw today, you can go out and quote it. 62% of American people say they're ready to support a woman for president. And of those who are ready, 42% believe it will be Hillary. On the Republican side, they believe it will be Condoleezza Rice. I'll take a Rice battle any day. That will be the battle of the century. Get me back on the front lines again. I get excited all over again. Can't lose in a battle like that. Condoleezza wins, you say the black person won. Hillary won, you say the woman won. So, see, number two. How's that? I'll take it. But my friends, here we are, still early in this century, still ready to change our country, still understanding the values that our first president taught us about the great office of the presidency and keeping the American people not only safe, but protecting and cherishing the values of this great country. I think George W., the first one, the real one, would come back. And although it would be a very difficult job for even to get this wonderful man of courage and conviction elected in this new season, where we often vilify and demonize our candidates, he was still, if able to serve, would be a great president, a president who could turn around this era and make it more hospitable and more civil so that we can really have a conversation about what matters to us as Americans and as citizens of this great democracy. And I must say this in closing, and of course I'll take your questions, I'll take your suggestions, and if you have any good recipes, I'll listen to that as well. President Bush is fond of saying that freedom is on the march. He mentioned freedom 27 times in his inaugural address, 21 times in his State of the Union. And I was proud to be able to quote the president. I'm going to write this one to him soon. He said, those who carry the message of freedom cannot also have the baggage of bigotry. But before freedom marched in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and took a stand in Palestine, of course it marched here in our own country 40 years ago. They marched in Selma, Alabama. I would hope before the next political season that we clean up our electoral system. There's something wrong in a democracy when people have to stand in line up to 10 hours in order to vote. There's something wrong in our democracy when people leave the polls not knowing if their votes were being counted. There's something wrong in our democracy when we still have butterfly ballots, that we still have those old antiquated punch card machines that produced so many errors in 2000 and again in 2004 in Cuyahoga County. There's something wrong in our society when I can go to the ATM and get a receipt, but can't get a receipt from an electronic voting machine. There's something wrong in our society when we purge people right before Election Day and don't give them a reason why we took them off the voter roll. And there's something wrong when 1/3 of eligible black men in the South have been removed from the voter rolls. Martha Stewart will get a second chance starting next month. But there are so many people that I know in the Deep South that never will get a second chance, and they're paying taxes, and yet they will not get a second chance at voting and becoming good citizens and stewards of our democracy. So we need to clean up our democratic system so that it works for everybody, and so it will also become the model that we want to take around the world, and something that the president can proudly proclaim. This is something that he cleaned up. So that's my next love letter to George W. Bush. Thank you all. God bless you.
This one here so that someone can come, but have one over here.
Thank you so very much for your comments this evening. We really are appreciative and excited for you being here in Richmond tonight. But my question has to do with your comment as it relates to receiving and receipt from the voting machine. Oftentimes, would you comment on why you think that is so important, and then how do you equate that to someone being able to buy that vote? Or is that a thought?
I believe that we should have voter-verified paper trail, paper audit to our vote. Without that ability, we can't have a recount. It's a close election. Without that ability, citizens don't feel secure or confident that their votes were counted. If I can go to ATM, everything you do in America is transactional. You get a receipt. Why not vote? Why not have some ability to know if that machine worked, if the machine really cast your ballot? We saw in this past election several areas around the country, including North Carolina and in Franklin County, Ohio, where the machines did not properly work. We also know in the 2002 cycle that some of the machines that were set up here in Virginia, as well as machines set up in Maryland, did not work. And so people were voting for hours before the machines were even turned on. Look, we have basically people, volunteers who are willing to serve as poll workers who don't know how to turn those machines on, don't know how to really activate them, don't know how to warm them up. Who secures the machine before Election Day? Who monitors machines on Election Day? Who counts those ballots after the polls close? We just got to have a secure system. And we can secure our voting system, but we cannot continue to have 15 different voting systems, 15 different standards that we use to count the vote, and expect people to believe in the results. So let's clean up our electoral system. We passed a bill in the fall of 2002, Help America Vote Act. We didn't quite fund it, but that's pretty much how we do everything in Washington these days. We have great initiatives, but no funding behind them, so we leave it up to the states, to go out there and to raise the money to make it happen. But let's clean up our electoral system once and for all. Let's remove partisan officials from conducting elections in this country. There's no place in our democracy for the Catherine Harris or the Ken Blackwell, even a Democrat running the election. Let's have nonpartisan election officials also take over that process. You can have people, impartial people, who can administer the elections so that we can reduce the amount of anxiety that takes place on election day. Like I said, We're studying now the problems that took place in Ohio, and we had a lot of problems. The fact is, Republicans won 2 days out because they did a lot of early voting, absentee voting. They're very good at that. We won an election day, but not enough people came out. And in the study that we're doing in Ohio, other 47% of people who showed up and had to wait in line over 2 hours. You ever heard Tina Turner's song, What Love Got to Do With It? That's a lot of love to wait 10 hours to vote for John Kerry. I don't know if Teresa would have done that. Seriously, 10 hours, and it was raining and it was cold. And thanks to Starbucks and some of the local coffee companies, they brought, warm hot chocolate and stuff just to keep people in line. But what we learned, and other 7% of people who saw the lines were long, 60% did not go back out and vote. And you know what? They were in our precincts, what we call Democratic precincts. So clean up the system, restore voter confidence, and make this democracy one that we can take all over the world and not be ashamed of. You can stand up. I know you want to sound like Oprah with your mic. Pass the mic. Thank you.
Talofa, Donna. I'm a visitor here in Virginia. I am a resident of the United States Territory of American Samoa. And before I go any farther, I'd like to invite you there. It's very warm there. I, like you, am a member of the Democratic National Committee. I'm the committee woman from American Samoa, and I was recently at our meeting in Washington, which was my first time in national politics, and it was wonderful. I'm sure that you're aware that the citizens of the District of Columbia cannot vote for president. Well, neither can the citizens of the United States territories. And American Samoa and the rest of them together make about 5 million votes. And in this last election, it was really frustrating for us not to be able to vote. My husband and I considered flying to Hawaii and voting there. It's a 5-hour flight from Pago Pago to Honolulu. But we would have been willing to do it, except that we knew that Hawaii would probably, it wouldn't have made a difference for us to vote there. If we could have maybe flown to Alabama or somewhere, it might have made a difference. But in any case, my question to you is there a place in the upper echelons of the Democratic Party that is talking about bringing the vote to the territories? It's something that as a U.S. citizen, I feel really disenfranchised, and so do the people who live there.
Well, thank you so much. As a district resident, I'm well aware of our limited privileges that we have as American citizens. I also believe that there's no place in our society for second-class citizens when it comes to voting. And as a district resident, we should have voting rights in the United States Congress. We do not. That's a shame. I mean, there was a cartoon in the Washington Post recently where they had the president talking to, everyone in the mall about freedom, like shouting out all over the world, and right here in the District of Columbia, we don't have any voting rights. And and the sad part, so the answer is yes, let's get a Democrat back in the White House, and we'll expand democracy for all Americans. That's just a simple answer, because that's what we believe in. We don't believe in limiting people's rights when it comes to this democracy. We want to give Puerto Rico, full statehood and privileges. And we understand that our Constitution can be amended for that purpose. There's a bill now in Congress to allow that to happen. There's also a bill that will expand the number of representatives in the House by 1, and give Utah 1, I guess thinking that'll be a Republican, and give the district a vote and the House of Representatives. But it does not address the fact that we have no United States senators. And just recently, the Republicans, in that infinite wisdom, decided not to play with the district budget anymore. We're so excited that we can finally control what day our trash get picked up, what alleys get closed, and whether or not we spend our money on a new convention center or to give poor women the right to have reproductive services. So this is a larger fight that we have in our society, but we have to start by educating the American people, using forums like this, talking about the issues, talking about the solutions, and how we get to the solutions. The American people are very charitable, and they're given, very charitable in their understanding and their outreach, but they must be educated in private first. So let's keep talking about it, and let's hope that once we get a Democrat back in the White House in 2008, you heard it here first, that we can make some of these changes that will improve democracy for all citizens, whether you live on the mainland or you're part of the current so-called, and I hate that territory. And by the way, next time, Hawaii, we were scared. We sent out Gore. They sent Dick Cheney. We're like, okay. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Craig Cameron. I'm a resident of Richmond. Ms. Brazile, you mentioned that Democratic candidates seem unable to connect with the populace in general. I'm wondering if you think the primary system might be all to blame for that. Whether it's factual or not, I get the impression, the feeling that the people of Iowa or New Hampshire are getting to select the presidential candidate for the rest of the United States, and somehow that doesn't strike me as fair. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll take the first one. You know, when I first went to Des Moines, I was 1983. I never thought there was any colder place on the planet. 16 degrees below zero. Landlocked state. You know how we get when we don't get seafood. I went for days. I'll never forget. I had to drive. Back then there was this law that said that every 3 days you had to leave the state in order not to allow your salary and so forth to go against the presidential limit. The limit was $750,000. So every third day I normally went to St. Louis because, you know, at least they got a river and you can get some blues and some fish and some grub and some, you know, I'm a Louisiana girl, you know, what do you expect? So one day I was too far in the middle of the state and I said, what am I going to do? What state can I go to? So I started driving and I ended up in South Dakota. And that was my first, you know, I guess I got this instant feeling. I said, we got to change this. We got to be able to have our presidential season begin somewhere warm, where you can function. Now, in 2004, there were already a deal on the table. The Republicans set their calendar in their presidential year. So they've already set out New Hampshire as the first two nominating contests in 2008. The question is, will Democrats follow, or will Democrats basically go in there and tear up the old front-loaded system and say, okay, what can we do to put forward people that the American people will see as normal, regular, everyday Joes and Janes? Now, I like the fact that South Carolina wants to be in the mix. I like the fact that Arizona wants to be in the mix. I understand why you wouldn't want to start in Louisiana, but we got Democratic government. And we have 4 seasons. Crawfish, shrimp, crab, and mackerel. Never worry about the weather. Every time it rains, people have waterfront property. So, but I'll go with South Carolina being in the mix. I'll even go with Virginia. I'll go with Arkansas. But we cannot continue to let Iowa and New Hampshire dominate the discussion, because in reality, it really doesn't reflect the great diversity of our country. And although the people in those 2 states put a lot of time and energy and looking over these candidates, poring over the facts, they're very well versed. They can tell you chapter and verse what John Kerry said about every issue, because he went into their living room. He had to eat their soup. He had to talk, he had to have chili and gravy. And by the way, when I cut off, I'll never forget when I had to reduce the budget in the 2000 campaign, I said, we will not go to another chili steak fry. Don't sound right. Chili on top of the steak? And that's a big thing. And people just went crazy that I was canceling the chili steak fries. I said, we can't do that. and still have enough money. But we need to expand the number of states, and the Democratic Party has a new commission chaired by Dave Price in North Carolina and Alexis Herman, who now resides in Virginia. I'm on that commission. I'm open to it this time, and I'm going to be pushing for a southern state. The older I get, the more biased I become. And perhaps it is, and I'll have to be blunt in this room, it may have happened working for a lot of Northeastern candidates. They just don't emote well. Let me tell you, I've been two foods, I've been three foods, I've carried but when I worked in the Dukakis campaign, I say, how did I get so many strikes against me? I've always been black. That's not a problem. I can handle that. I've been a woman all my life. I can handle that. I'm born a woman. But all of a sudden, I'm a Southern. I'm like, when did that become an issue? I didn't go to Harvard. When did that become an issue? Jesus, they just started layering it on you. And I kept saying, we're going to have problems in the South. Because if I'm having a problem, they'll never get it. Southern culture, there's nothing wrong with Southern culture. I love Southerners. I feel at home in the South. I can't tell you the many days and nights I've gotten up at 3, 4 in the morning and started driving home because I want to get home by 7 o'clock the next day. Because there's something about the South. I can do that. Southerners open up their homes, their hearts. When I lived in Tennessee, I had more food and more people throwing things at me. I lived better than I ever lived in my life. But we have to find candidates who are true to their values, true to who they are as human beings, and willing to let go of some of that persona that they build up on in the Senate or build up somewhere that makes them basically caricatures of themselves. All I can tell you is that when I worked with Al Gore, who I love, I thought Al Gore would have made a great president. I have no regrets giving Al Gore 2+ years of my life, my best years, including when I turned 40. I have no regrets living in Tennessee, no regret spent 36 long days trying to make sure every vote was counted in Florida. The only regret I have is that I didn't fight hard enough to convince Al Gore that if he believed in something, regardless of what the polls said and regardless of what his strategists said, just say it and feel it and own it. That's the regret I have. Next question. Yes, ma'am. Oh, go ahead. No, the mic was from you.
Hi, my name is Heather Shea. One of my questions is what you were talking about earlier with energizing the party and getting the grassroots efforts. I have spent a couple of years since I retired from practice law working with young people. And one of the problems I see is Republicans are very good at attracting their base of kids who are in college and who have a game plan. But I'm encountering a lot of young people who are somewhat interested in politics, but there's so much apathy. And it's hard to get them to self-reflect and sort of figure out what are your values and what do your values tell you about who you vote for, and therefore who should you vote for. I run into young people all the time and I'll say, who did you vote for, last November, who you're going to vote for? And they would tell me, and we would get into a discussion of their values, and I said, well, think about what your values are and what party do your values match with. And I was having a hard time communicating why their values were really with the Democratic Party instead of who they were thinking about voting for. So my question is, can we do a better job of getting our message across? Because I felt that was lacking, especially when I was working in the primaries in South Carolina and here in Virginia. People were like, well, I'm open to voting for someone other than George W., but I just don't know what the Democratic Party stands for. And it was a major frustration. So one, I'm hoping that Howard Dean can do a better job of communicating the message to the party. And two, I'm hoping that somewhere along the line we get a game plan of how to energize the youth, because I think that's where the rebirth of our party has to be, is energizing young people of our country and getting them to focus on something more than AOL and their cell phone. Thanks.
Well, first of all, I think young people have to find their voice. This generation is finding its voice. It's finding its seat at the table, and I think they're expressing themselves in ways that Generation X did not. You know, the one thing, I guess I'm Z because X passed me by, and Y is nowhere inside anymore. I don't have eternal youth. But Generation X, that came of age during Ronald Reagan, is a more conservative generation. I don't want to say the Democrats have totally lost him, but that's a generation that we got back a little bit during Clinton, but we didn't hold on to them. So Generation X is a generation that at 30 to 40, they're hard to get back. But Generation Y, this generation has a lot of things that are consistent with Democratic values. They spend more time in community service than Generation X. They believe in the value of sacrifice and giving back to their community, and they're looking for ways to contribute to the larger world and not just themselves. Generation X was consumed with what they can put in their pockets, while Generation Y is consumed with what they can give from their hearts. So I think we have a way to reach them. What I found in my dealings with young people is, and I saw a young woman, I'm like, give me your email address. We have to bring them in early. I started interning. I not only worked on campaigns early, I was interning at an early age. I had a hunger. I wanted to change the world. At least I thought I could. I thought I could make a difference if I got involved in public service. And I'm sure those of you who are elected officials in this room are former elected officials. There was this desire of me. You wanted to help people. You wanted to change something. You wanted to serve the people that you grew up with. And you wanted to reflect and represent those values. Give young people that opportunity. They are not as apathetic as you think. We just have not paved a road that they understand how to journey in politics. Once we provide the leadership and say the door is open, come take your seat, we need you to serve, you'll see more of them served in elected office and in public service. And America will be better because of it, and not, and I think the Democratic Party will come back. Now, I have to say this. Republicans, and I live, by the way, I am now, John Ashcroft is on my block. He hasn't left town yet. Catherine Harris lives in my neighborhood. They go to neighborhood. The reason why I chose to live on this particular block in Washington, D.C. is because Frederick Douglass made his home on A Street. And I fell in love when I was a little girl, when I was studying all these great figures. You know, when you're poor, you really don't know. Not that your parents, my mother was a maid, my father was a janitor. I love them because they taught us what they lacked in money. They taught us in values, all 9 of us. And they taught us to respect other people. But they also challenged us to find role models that we could emulate and be like when we grew up. Of course, everybody I wanted to be like initially, they told me I couldn't be that. So it took me a while to sort of get up and moving in that direction. But once I got there, I was like, wow, I want to be like Frederick Douglass. Wow, I want to be like Harriet Tubman. Wow, I want to be like, Eleanor Roosevelt. I knew early on that I wanted to be a little bit of everything. And so what I was looking for as I got involved in public service, I was looking for role models that would just help me nurture what was inside of me. I already had the bug. I just wanted somebody to keep that fever going. And that's what young people are looking for. They're looking for somebody to bring them in. I work in my office with 3 people under 21. And some days I say, whoa, what are you listening to? But I'm now listening to Usher. Whoa. I am so hip, I'm hot. I mean, I get it. I have my iPod. I only can put 400 songs. I don't know how they can get 10,000 songs. I'm like, you got that? And they taught me how to download. I love them. I love them, and I love teaching because these young people are so romantic. They really believe, and we gotta let them serve. They're going to be the greatest generation, the second greatest generation. My grandfather, they will be the second greatest generation if we allow them to take their seats at the table. I believe that in my heart. I've seen them, I've come up with them, and I have a lot of faith in them. The dean has told me I have to stop. Dean, I have to tell you, Reverend Jackson once told me, start low, go slow, rise high, strike fire, sit down. And I'm not a Baptist, I don't move that quickly, but I'm trying. Thank you.
Do you find that the brutal scrutinization of candidates' personal lives deters interesting, passionate, good candidates, and people who don't want to wear the little red suit and be a role model for, you know, a lot of people out there who aren't terribly straight-laced and goody two-shoes? Do you find that, or is that just the game you have to play?
Well, one of the things that Karl Rove has mastered, and he has made it a art form, is that he masters taking all of the positive attributes that a candidate may have and turn it into a negative. So someone's service in Vietnam, someone's strength and courage, the fact that they serve, that could be turned into a negative. I can see and understand how that turned people off. I mean, what I learned in 2000 was amazing. And Al Gore, who would say sky blue, Republicans would come out and say, well, he said he invented the blue sky. The other day I was defending Howard Dean because they said Howard Dean made a racist comment. I said, here's one for the black people. He made a racist comment, we would have, you know, beat him up. And they said, oh no, it was racist. I'm like, how was that? It wasn't racist. He was making a statement about the fact that Democrats can fill a room with people of color because we've expanded and did outreach. Republicans still can't find enough people to fill essentially a telephone booth without bringing all the hotel staff. We all applauded and gave him a standing ovation. You know, there's something when you see a white man, you know, make passionate remarks and like, we've fallen in love. And everybody say, well, there's something wrong, he's imbalanced. I say, how are you the first white man to feel black in a long time, don't you? And he looked at me and said, I don't understand that yet. I said, don't, you're from Vermont. Fear, yes. Let me tell you something. I think every political candidate, every aspiring political candidate should do an audit of their lives and just pull it out open. We're not perfect. The one thing I liked about what the president said the other day in that, you know, tailgate was that he said to this preacher, he said, how can I differentiate sin? I'm a sinner. He said he wasn't going to kick homosexuals. I mean, the president is able to do that. And I also think presidential candidates should be able to talk about their values, talk about who they are, talk about their flaws. John 8, he who's without sin, or she cast the first stone. You know, we have to be willing to talk about that. I have to tell you a story. Dean, when I worked for Gephardt, whenever, during those days, I don't know if people would ask me to do it now, but they always said, Donna will do it. And I would say, what am I going to do? Well, go in there and ask Dick about if he had an extramarital affair and if he ever smoked marijuana. I said, Dick Gephardt? I can tell you he's never smoked weed because he can't relax. Extramarital affair? I said, I mean, with no eyebrows, he can't relax. And yet they would put those out every campaign. I had to go and ask these candidates. I said, you know, I'm going to have to deep, really, into your private life. And if there's something you want to tell me, you know, I always wanted to be a priest, so I love that. I was so upset when he told me I couldn't be a priest because I was a woman. I'm like, God didn't discriminate. That's a whole other conversation. But I went to Dick Gephardt, and I said, Dick, and I looked at him, I said, I've got some really interesting questions to ask you. So I'll get the good ones out of the way about your taxes and your arrest record, juvenile, all that stuff. I said, but then we're going to get into sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And so I started off by, I did the drug question. I thought the drug question was easy. I said, have you ever, you know, inhaled any powdery substance? No. I said, okay. I said, have you ever smoked reefer? Reefer? I said, weed. Weed? I was doing my street terms. Never bought a nickel bag? Nickel bag. I said, what do y'all call it? Grass? Grass? And then I finally said, marijuana. He said, cannabis? these questions. He said, of course not. And I said to myself, right, because you can't relax. And then, of course, the Jane thing was, you know, Dick and Jane, come on. That was a no-brainer. I said, has Spot witnessed you? Dick and Jane, Spot, the dog, right? I said, has Spot witnessed you with another woman? Because you know, off the top, no, Jane was the first wife I penned. And I said, pen? How? How you? I went back to the senior staff meeting and I gave my report that no, he's never tried cocaine. No, he's never tried marijuana, cannabis. And I said, and he's only been with Jane. And we said, Lauren. Oh, I gotta tell y'all, I love me some Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was as human can get. I saw him last week at the DNC meeting, and first of all, he's still. You tell Hillary I said that. He's still good on the eyes. You know, after he had his heart attack, I said, I sent up more novenas for you than I sent up at my own fault. I thought that would turn him around. He looked at me and he said, you still flirting with me? I said, yeah, I just want to see if you're still keeping your vibe. He said, you know I'm okay. I said, I said, what you? But you know, because he's human, you know, he touches you, he connects with you. Well, I enjoy working for him. I just love it. But this last election, you know, how do you get over it? You just tell people straight up, like the president. Here, I'm going to lay it out. I'm not going to go into detail. But I've been a senator. People understand that. Sometimes they'll come back and use it against you. But you got to be true to yourself. And I don't think there's perfect people. Ken Melvin said this to me. He said, you know, Donna, the best politicians are those who are not perfect, who've been scarred by life, who got up, cleaned themselves up, and went back out there and, you know, wished to serve. And that coming from a Republican 4 days after Valentine's Day was the best love that I could get out of it. So thank you all. Go out there and serve and soar and love. Thank you.